We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
From your favorite source for Chicago White Sox talk, delivering news, interviews, analysis, and more. This is the Sox Machine podcast with your hosts, Jim Margalus, James Fegan, and Josh Nelson.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome to the Sox Machine podcast. I'm your host, Josh Nelson, and it's Thursday night, February 15th, 2024. In this podcast episode, James Fegan will join us from White Sox camp down in Arizona to share his insights, speaking with the White Sox executives, coaches, and players. Then Jim Margalus will join me as we typically hand out our offseason grades to the White Sox front office when spring training starts. It's a tough task this time around because Dylan Cease is still with the White Sox and Chris Getz keeps adding players. Pedro Grifol kicked off camp meeting with the media, really emphasizing the importance of first week in spring training.
Talked about this morning, trying to look for some margins, trying to find and attack margins, right? And I let them know that these 5 days are extremely important, especially to our success and what we're trying to do, and that's why they got to come in here 5 days early. It's not just to throw bullpens and get ready. You know, it's about making sure that we execute those fundamentals on those backfields and really get good at, you know, what I think are margins, which is PFPs. These are things that we have to clean up as an organization, and I wanted attention to detail, and you know, it was a really good day for that. The second thing is these guys came in really prepared, man. I was really happy with the reports that we got from our trainers. You know, from the physicals, from their strength and conditioning this morning. These guys came in really strong and understand that there's competition here, which is a great thing for anyone individually and as an organization. And these guys are prepared to do so. I really enjoyed the bullpens. I won't get into them individually, but you know, Maldonado and Stassi, you know, just looking over there and hearing these guys' conversations with pitchers were excellent.
Of course, Grifol said something similar last year, and that team lost 101 games, which Grifol is trying his hardest to convince that he and the team has turned the page from 2023.
As a matter of fact, I know nobody in that clubhouse is talking about last year. I haven't heard one comment made from 2023, and if I do, that's where it ends. We've turned the page, and we're looking forward to having these positional players here work out those 4 days and get ready for some Cactus League games.
One area of the team Grifol still likes is the catching position. Not only adding veterans in Martin Maldonado and Max Stassi, but the quality of catching throughout the minor leagues.
I think I mentioned this to Getzy yesterday. This is my 33rd professional season, right? I've yet to see a roster with 7 catchers of this potential, of this caliber. We have from 12-year veterans to, guys that we feel are going to impact the game for a long, long time. We got young guys with major league experience that have faced some adversity in the major leagues, it's a really good core, and him and Max are leading this core, and I'm excited to watch these guys play. These guys can really play, can really defend.
There's a lot of roster churn and new faces coming into White Sox camp. The bullpen is going to look a lot different in 2024 for the White Sox, and Grifol shared his hopes for those new veteran additions.
To bring in a couple of more guys with experience that have had success at this level, it's really interesting. We have, Knebel's been a guy that knows what it feels like at the end of games and has had really good success back there and is comfortable back there. And the same thing with Leone. Not as much as Knebel as far as the ninth is concerned, but he's pitching leverage a ton of times. And he's got some familiarity with Banny. So, you're talking about those two guys and Jesse Chavez, who threw a bullpen today, and if you watch him, execute his 25, 30 pitches, you know why he's been in the game for 17 years, right? So, we're talking about young guys that are really, really excited, mixed in with guys that have been there, done it, and played for some playoff teams and some championship teams, and we're excited to put it all together.
Back to the roster churn, with so many new players vying for spots in the opening day team. Is this a good thing for the White Sox and Grifol?
First of all, I'm loving it. I'm loving every minute of it. These guys are hungry. Everybody's got something to play for. As an individual, we got something to play for as an organization. There's a hell of a lot of competition. They know it. They're aware of it. We know it. We did our homework acquiring these guys. We've done our homework on what we want this team to look like. Not so much personnel-wise, but what we want it to look like on the field. How we want it to play, how we want it to act like. So this is an exciting time for us.
One of the new faces in camp is starting pitcher Erick Fedde, which the Chicago White Sox outbid the New York Mets during the winter meetings for a 2-year deal valued at $15 million. Fedde talked about what he did to get back on track after being DFA'd in 2022 and helped him excel in the KBO last year.
In 2022 was non-tendered and kind of wake-up call of got to change things. So we moved out to Scottsdale, and then I found a facility through Sean Doolittle, who recommended Push out here in Scottsdale, or they're in Tempe, sorry. But just kind of getting myself figured out and kind of really focusing on pitch development. So went there and just kind of showed them what I was struggling with, which was a very inconsistent changeup, and then I needed kind of a breaking ball that was a put-away pitch. Just couldn't get really the swing and miss, and then so just started developing from there, and luckily had a lot of success with it, and got what I was looking for.
Helping us get those sound bites from spring training and joining us now is the Sox Machine beat reporter from camp down in Arizona. It's James Fegan. And hello, James. I love how on Sox Machine the early comments about spring training coverage is asking you if you got another Dodge Ram at the car rental shop. Can you provide an update if you got a Dodge Ram?
I got a very reasonable Kia Soul. I got offered to upgrade, but it wasn't to a Ram. And also, I don't think the Sox Machine beat reporter project is yet at the impromptu car rental upgrade stage. Maybe one day when we're all wearing we're rich, dressing like rich Texas oil men and wearing 10-gallon hats, but we're not there yet.
Well, I'm curious, what did they offer in an upgrade?
They were just trying to sell me on the deal, oh, you can do to a full size for such and such price, which I don't even know what it means, just another row of cars. But they always phrase it oh, you're going to be here 10 days. It's a lot of time to be in a small car. People are just losing their minds after a week of being stuck in a Toyota Prius is the premise of this. I don't know why it's just suddenly a very convincing argument at the rental car counter when it costs you hundreds of dollars to ship from what you're doing.
Yeah.
But they tried it.
And they failed. I'm glad I'm sorry I didn't get the Dodge Ram. Maybe next year. And for those listening, you can go to patreon.com/Sox Machine and help out with James's car rental budget.
I like seeing the road, but okay.
Let's talk about what you are hearing so far at camp, and it starts with Pedro Grifol. and he really wants to turn the page from 2023, James. And I think you asked a really good question about the player's ability to turn the page from last season. And we heard a similar tone and focus last year, especially like from Tim Anderson during camp, about everyone trying to pull on the same rope here and try to be more positive going to 2023. And it seemed that the issues from 2022 multiplied last year. So how feasible is it for Grifol to convince everyone from outside of the clubhouse that the team is truly prepared to turn the page and pretend last year didn't happen?
I mean, one, he can't. I literally talked to a player at length about last year, right before we did that. So which is why I kind of asked the question of how do you know that the players have turned the page? But I mean, I don't think you can just delete your experiences from last season, and I don't even think that'd be productive. I would say that they've cleared out a lot of people from last year, or made them redundant, or made them in a situation where they kind of have to produce a lot better than last year, or they'll be replaced. And it seems like that's the kind of galvanizing force that every player is latching onto more readily, of like, hey, we gotta produce, or we won't be here next season, or maybe they won't make it till June. So it's very much more of a feel of the type of things that the members of the Dirty Dozen said before they flew out on their mission to Germany, then a turn the page, or last year didn't happen. I mean, I get it from his perspective a lot, because we were talking about last season as being just like, well, this didn't work. What are you going to do next? Or what do you learn from this? Last July when they were setting up the deadline, and the last 2 months, especially with the lack of really prospect talent, it was a lot of just AAA filler coming in rather than people you legitimately thought have a chance to carve out a space next season, even with some of the trade deadline acquisitions, like even giving Corey Lee extended run that didn't turn into Corey Lee's your starting catcher now. He's pretty much blocked from making the team. Last year really didn't have much purpose other than revisiting or recriminating or talking about last year. So I see why he wants to put this limit and this cap on how much we just kind of talk about that. But I don't think it's something where the players are just never going to speak of last year or have this kind of same absolutist thing. I mean, Andrew Benintendi wants to have a better year and, shake off being unhealthy all of last year. I don't think he's just I wasn't focused. I don't want to talk about it anymore. I think there's more physical reasons for him. I think we're going to talk to Eloy about last year and what he's learned from his video, that he's going to be able to add loft to the swing. Luis Roberts trying to build off last year. I just don't think that there's this absolutist last year focus didn't happen. That's going to take hold. I think it's more that they want to move on narratively from it. But a lot of guys, last year shapes how they're going to go forward in their careers, of what they think a good clubhouse is and what happens when it's not there. So I don't think of the same clear turning the page is really feasible in some respects.
So while Grifol, not a big fan of talking about last year, especially questions of how and what did he learn from last year, he does not like those questions based on listening to the sound bites. The other topic that he's not thrilled about answering, and I don't know if irritated is the correct way to describe on how he sounds, but when reporters ask him about Dylan Cease, he kind of shuts them down and says, hey, I talked about this at the Boys and Girls Club. I've moved on. It is what it is. Until Cease is here, he's our opening day starter until he's not. Dylan Cease spoke to you guys at camp, and I think he understands the situation that he's in, James. And you spoke with Chris Getz today on Thursday that even with the news coming out of Baltimore that their starting pitcher, Kyle Bradish, has a UCL sprain, and there's some concerns that he may need Tommy John now, the Orioles still haven't called the White Sox about Cease. Do you think the trade talks become a distraction for Cease and the White Sox as they prepare for opening day during spring training?
On the one hand, it's hard to really, this whole let's shock the world or use the Pacoda projection as motivation rallying cry. I don't know how it maintains, when they say they're within 5-6 games of the division race, because it's really as mucked up and ugly as it was last year. And I don't think that should change them from trading Cease at the deadline. And how does the same rallying cry fit when you trade your ace, you trade your best pitcher, you trade your opening day starter? I think it can be or maybe that happens in spring if Baltimore just simply calls Getz later in the day. On one hand, I think that's a challenge to it, but if there's anyone who I believe when he says he's not talking about something or not thinking about something that much, or really seems like he can just operate in his own world and not be concerned about worldly things, Dylan Cease is the one I believe. That dude is really just doing his own thing and he's not this ball of anxiety that there's some players that I really connect with because I feel similar to them in ways, and I see how they're constantly criticizing themselves and constantly worrying about the next thing. As much as friendly and Dylan and I as relationship is, it's not because our brains work similarly. He's very much in his own place, and I don't if he has a difficult season, I don't see this being the cause of it.
So if he's during a bullpen session and he sees Chris Getz walking towards him and waves him down, and Getz says, "Dylan, it's been a pleasure, man. You got to pack your bags and you got to join Orioles spring training camp." You just think that'll just like roll off his back and be like, okay, and just drop the baseball and pack up and leave?
For the most part, I don't think he'll see him until like Chris physically walks into the path of his bullpen session to
good point,
stop him from throwing anymore. But yeah, I think he would. I mean, this is a guy who was traded when he was still an A-ball. This was somebody who blew out when he was still in high school. He's kind of had these traumatic, big, life-changing experiences that baseball can offer you that can be a surprise to some guys when maybe they don't get they're with the team that drafted them for the first 8-9 years of their career. I think Dylan's already been through that, and it's a personality that's really just, oh, okay, that's what's happening, all right, and then moves on. It's not he's never moved around like he has the weight of the world on his shoulders, which is why I was almost surprised that talking to him after the 2020 playoff start, that he acknowledged that adrenaline and the crowd feeling was as big of a factor as it was, because that's probably the only time I've really heard him talking that way about, if anything, he's trying to match the intensity and trying to get him hype. He's someone who kind of works his way into games. You see his velocity tick up over the first couple of innings. He's not someone who operates on adrenaline that often. So I think he's probably the ideal guy to go through something like this.
Now, with this much roster churn for the White Sox, there's quite a bit of key battles in camp. There's the right field situation, but I want to ask you about on the pitching side, on the starting pitching and the bullpen. The White Sox, they've signed a few starting pitchers. They're inviting to camp some starting pitchers. There's the whole Michael Kopech and Garrett Crochet debate as well, if they are still starting pitchers. And the White Sox, before spring training started and even after spring training has started, they have signed veteran relievers as non-roster invitees to compete for spots in the White Sox bullpen. So let's start on the starting pitching front. What are you hearing about how the White Sox are going to handle creating a 5-man rotation? And is that the plan, is to create a 5-man rotation, or could they entertain the idea of going with a 6-man rotation to start the season?
I think it's, being floated as some consideration, but I imagine a more likely scenario is you see, if I had to peg it today, I'd say Cease, Fedde, Kopech, Soroka, Flexen, and then you can have Tukey be a multi-inning long guy. You could have Garrett Crochet be a multi-inning long guy, and kind of piece it together from there. I think Nastrini could, set the world on fire on spring, and they'd probably still default towards putting him in AAA and having him cook a little bit there for a bit longer, unless there's a series of other circumstances or injuries that make it more of a situation where you're looking for really, we got to go to other options and, let's let this guy who's been dominant cook. But I see it more going a traditional set and then keeping a couple guys who you can extend a bit more on the roster naturally, that you, especially in the sense of Toussaint, you can't really flex him out to the minors anyway. I'd be surprised a little at this point if they really went to a 6-man.
Got it. So on the bullpen side, my thinking was during the offseason, maybe the White Sox let some of the young relievers that they have in the upper minors pitch in the major leagues in 2024 and go trial by fire and see who sticks and who doesn't, and just have constant churn and keep sending guys from Charlotte to Chicago throughout the season. But with all these non-roster invitees of these veteran relievers like Jesse Chavez, which I mentioned in a previous episode, I'm rooting for him to make the team, so I'm not older than every White Sox player on the roster. They even brought in Corey Knebel, former closer, former all-star closer, but he's dealing or trying to recover from arm and shoulder injuries. With all these veterans in camp for relievers, is the idea that as they get closer, they're going to be added not only to the 40-man roster, the 26-man roster, and Chris Getz is trying to give Pedro Grifol the most veteran bullpen that he possibly can and not so many young guys?
I would think he definitely wants that option. I don't think he's going to make him carry like a Corey Knebel if he's clearly not anywhere near pre-injury form, but there's definitely been an emphasis on adding some measure of experience that they can turn to, because there's always room for Prolander Baroa or the likes of that to kind of make a midseason debut. I don't think you have to force the hand of saying we need to have this be a kind of a prospect clearinghouse, or we need to see Jordan Leisure from the start of opening day. If anything, I think it's probably would be a big challenge to rush those guys, and especially in terms of the command they've shown recently, to just be major league viable from the start. So as much as you kind of have to see what guys like Joe Barlow and Dominic Leone have, especially given their recent history, I think the leaning would probably be you don't want to, because all non-roster invites have a standard opt-out clause at the end of spring now. I think if you're showing you that they can be viable guys that you can groom to be assets by midseason, you want to go with that. Whereas, guys like Baroa and Leisure offer you a measure of time that you can use in AAA at the start of the year.
Got it. And on the position player side, we'll learn more as everybody shows up to camp. Not everybody in the position player side. Is that correct? Not everybody has yet to make it to camp. I don't think you haven't seen Eloy or Luis Robert, right?
Not Eloy, not Luis Robert. I have not seen Danny Mendick wearing the 0 jersey yet, which is, obviously something I'm greatly anticipating, but I would say probably 60% of the position side is already in camp. Guys like Andrew Vaughn, Benintendi are already there, in addition to Nicky Lopez. And I always get close to naming a catcher as a position player and then realizing that pitchers need someone to throw to, but it's a very healthy amount of position players already there. A lot of them because they already live in the area.
So one of those new faces joining the White Sox, and I get a chuckle because the White Sox made this announcement on Twitter on Wednesday night at 9:00 Central Time. Mike Moustakas is signed by the White Sox, and according to USA Today's Bob Nightingale, if he makes the team, it's a $2 million contract with an additional $2 million in incentives. Jim Margalus wrote about Moustakas on Sox Machine about the path for him making the 26-man roster as possible depth at both third base and first base, which could spell trouble for Gavin Sheets. Is that what you are hearing at camp, James, about the White Sox plans for Mike Moustakas? Is this just simply to add depth to the team, or are there greater aspirations of bringing in somebody like Mike Moustakas?
Greater aspirations as far as what?
Like, he's going to be starting. He's going to be in our lineup. We're hoping to get 100 games out of him or more. He's going to be a key cog to the 2024 White Sox.
I think they view him at this point as kind of a bench bat. They really said, like, as far as pegging him to a position, Getz really said, like, literally said, like, let's see where his offense is, and that will kind of dictate it from there. They said he's played from third, he's played some first, but they want to see if his bat is viable to be a contributor. They're not saying this is our new DH or this is someone threatening or squeezing Moncada for playing time. It's really like, he hit right-handed pitching okay last year. That's something they've been deficient in for years on end. This is another candidate for somebody who could potentially provide that service alongside Sheets, alongside DeLoach, alongside Fletcher.
With Sheets, then, like, is he in trouble of making the 26-man roster now when you have somebody like Moustakas on the team, and the fact that the White Sox have added a couple of right fielders? I get where Jim is coming from in his recent column on Sox Machine. Like, Gavin Sheets better ball out in spring training or he's going to be in Charlotte to start the season.
I mean, I would think he's in trouble. He had a sub 500 OPS in the second half last year.
Yeah.
And he clearly moved out of Grifol's rotation as far as regular playing time, much to his chagrin and much that he felt like was something that hampered his rhythm and being able to get a feel in the batter's box. And some of that is, sure, if you wanted the best Gavin Sheets, it seemed like they moved away to other options pretty quickly last year, and maybe that didn't feel entirely fair. But it's certainly where the position where his performance has put himself now, that's kind of got to be the life that he has to get used to, where he's someone who they can trust to be a contributor on short notice. That's kind of got to be the way his existence lives a little bit, at least to start this year, until he proves otherwise. But I think with his performance, and especially with Fletcher and DeLoach really situated to take over the right-handed at bats, especially pushing Eloy even more to designate hitter, I already thought that the things were stacked up against them. The fact that they brought in Moustakas, I think, either even further cements that they're willing to, explore a reality where he doesn't crack the roster because he didn't play well enough to really be somebody you carve out and stake out a roster spot for at the start of the season. And because he still has a remaining option, I think that's something we should be more than prepared to see them employ.
And then finally, John Morosi of MLB.com tweeted out early on Thursday that another former ex-Kansas City Royal, Whit Merrifield, is hoping to make his final decision where he'll play this upcoming weekend. So, James, is Whit Merrifield coming to White Sox camp?
I don't know for sure. It's not like it's certainly not like they're too stacked. It's not like Nicky Lopez is completely immovable in some way where, how could they possibly make room for Whit Merrifield? I certainly haven't heard anything specific, and I think he's probably played at least decently enough last year where he could be an option for maybe teams with the more grand designs than the White Sox. But I obviously wouldn't shock anyone if he came in. Obviously, they have room for him on the roster, room for playing time to what they've established as their middle infield combination is not airtight by any means. But mostly, I don't know. I've been back on the job for like a week. I haven't heard anything. And the White Sox spent today trying to justify the kind of proliferation of Royals connections that they've been adding in recently, saying they're using the connections, they're using the inside knowledge they have. If they have some personal insight to the player, why would they not use it? Was basically Getz's case. And I think they'd probably make a similar case with Merrifield if the opportunity arises where he'd be in their price range.
Yup. The other contender, it sounds like, through the River Mill is Philadelphia, as the Phillies may approach Whit Merrifield about being a bench bat. The Phillies, of course, will be a contending team in 2024. I guess from a White Sox sales point, I could see them going with Nicky Lopez at short and Whit Merrifield at second, which would make Paul DeJong that utility infielder role coming off the bench. It's not like the White Sox signed Paul DeJong to a large amount coming into this season, and even though we penciled him in at shortstop, DeJong could help out at both at shortstop and third base coming off the bench. I could see it, but I guess we'll know for sure over the weekend, White Sox fans, and we'll talk about where Whit Merrifield eventually signs on Monday's episode. But you could follow James on Twitter. He's at JR Fegan. If you are not already following him on Twitter, he's been doing a great job reporting down at camp, posting pictures, also comments as well when he is speaking to both White Sox executives, coaches, and players. So again, follow him on Twitter and, of course, read his work on SoxMachine.com. James, thanks so much for joining the podcast, and continue to have fun in Arizona in your Kia Soul.
Thanks. I'll try not to cough so vigorously while driving, probably for the safety of all of us.
We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
There's a million things we have to do today, and worrying doesn't need to be one of them. That's why 1 in 9 families use Life 360 for safety to connect to the people that matter most. Join today and get premium features that keep your family protected with real-time location updates, crash detection, and 24/7 roadside assistance. Because let's face it, you're more than just your to-do list. You're a family. So let's live Life 360. Download for free today.
Welcome back to the Sox Machine podcast. So I exchanged James Fegan for Jim Margalus, the managing editor of SoxMachine.com, now joins the podcast. And in this segment, I think, I'm not going to say it's an arduous task, but it is an unclear task because with spring training starting, and this is now our 11th season podcasting together, Jim. This is typically when we grade on how the White Sox front office did with their offseason. And for 10 of those 11 podcasts, we've been grading Rick Hahn and Kenny Williams, but now this is Chris Getz. But here we are on February 15th. And the reason I say it's difficult because there's still like lingering questions. And the biggest one is that he didn't trade Dylan Cease. And I don't know how to grade him because I don't want to be harsh and come off as overly critical in his first offseason, but I do want to be realistic in the work that he has done, but I'm also unclear in what the White Sox objectives, I should say, into this offseason, like what their big goals were. So for me, this has been kind of difficult and unclear. So if I had to ask you, like, what would be your thought process in trying to grade and how Chris Getz did this offseason?
Yeah, I think you have to, or at least the way I'm going about it, is issue a grade as though it were a Rick Hahn offseason or a Kenny Williams offseason. Just treat it as like, it's a big boy job with expectations for, a major sports enterprise. So you have to grade him strictly, harshly, however you want to call it, to uphold the standards of the position. The one thing I think I would keep in my back pocket is that there is a little bit of, and I hate using this word, but trying to change the culture. And we heard that so much that lost all meaning under Pedro Grifol last year, but it has to be done. Just the way, basically the previous White Sox administration hit dead ends, both in terms of the kind of talent they accumulated, the kind of insularity in their front office, the way Rick Hahn allowed himself to get handcuffed by Jerry Reinsdorf. I mean, Jerry Reinsdorf has a lot of the reasons why the rebuild didn't work, but part of the general manager's job is trying to mitigate that. And it's really seemed like with the Manny Machado thing that he really sold that as a possibility. And then, didn't realize that, ownership wasn't serious about this, and then had to backpedal and try to patch it up. And then it was just kind of scrambling after that to try to find contracts that ownership would approve. It just caused so much buildup and acrimony, and it all just kind of collapsed on itself once they got off that awful start and everybody started looking for life rafts. So there does have to be a cleansing or a purge of just all the toxins from the last 2 years. So I can appreciate part of what Getz is trying to do. And there's a chance that although this, assembly of talent doesn't look impressive, it could be greater than the sum of its parts, and by that I mean low 70s win total, but just, respectable baseball team, ordinary kind of bad, but satisfying in some ways that make you realize now you see a path forward. The roster isn't as bound as it was. There's more open-mindedness with the front office. Maybe Grifol's fired after the year, and there's finally an official turning of the page. So that's kind of what I'm keeping in mind. It's like a grade with an asterisk almost, or a grade with these terms are not absolute. I'm willing to go back and revise it based on it did work. But it does seem like a needle he's trying to thread, and there's no proof that he can thread a needle yet by trying to improve the team with intangibles versus talent, because we know that the White Sox stressed intangibles time and time again with guys they acquired, trying to sell them as plus additions when they were not free agents the White Sox fans were hoping for. So that's why I'm skeptical, but given like all the things that have gone wrong, there are a lot of things that can be addressed that have maybe not as much to do with the talent that's currently on the 26-man roster.
Let's say you're right, and the team that Chris Getz has built does win like 71 games in 2024. That's a 10-win improvement. For a first-time GM in their first year, I think you got to...
Cutting salary.
I think you got to take it. Right?
Cutting payroll. Like cutting payroll.
Yeah, and
whatever it comes to, like $50 million.
And let's say that's the number one goal from his boss, Jerry Reinsdorf. That, Chris, we cannot carry another $180+ million payroll. Or, better worded, we will not be carrying a $180 million payroll. Not debating if they can or cannot, but do not. They do not want to. And their payroll on opening day, depending on which veteran, non-roster invitees get added to the team, is probably going to be around $140 million. So Chris Getz cut $40 million off of the player payroll from last year. And assembling a team to get ready to play on opening day, this is still a pretty expensive team for how poor talent, at least on paper, but that's because there are some large contracts on this team, and like Andrew Benintendi and Yohan Moncada combined going to make more than $41 million this year. They're just not carrying the weight. And maybe they can in 2024, and they play up to the level that many people are expecting, and that contributes to the White Sox win improvement from last year. But like, back to your point though that you brought up on the culture side, do you think Chris Getz did enough to overhaul and do enough roster churn that there is going to be a difference in culture in 2024 than what we saw last year?
I think it will be by default. I think the question I would have is, or I think the thought I would have, I don't know if I could phrase it in the form of a question. Okay, I'll phrase it in the form of a question. It will be different, but will it be better? Because I think when you look at all of the players he's acquired, a lot of them are at career crossroads. Paul DeJong, Nicky Lopez, both catchers, Erick Fedde, some relievers. Like, basically everybody he acquired. Michael Soroka, another guy, Paul DeJong and Michael Soroka are both like, I'm just happy to have a major league contract. I'm happy to have like a lot of playing time in front of me. That's kind of, they're beggars can't be choosers. That's really the attitude they're taking. So there is an element of this roster that, can't take anything for granted the way that maybe like Tim Anderson could, or Yohan Moncada could, Yasmani Grandal, Eloy Jimenez, just when they were struggling and not really going to be replaced. They had to, basically the manager or the general manager was going to stick with them, whether it's because afraid to make changes, as Grifol seemed to be, or just, financially hamstrung by the big contracts and not having anybody better worthy of that playing time. So like, it's going to be different in that regard. The question I have is when you have all of these guys on 1-year deals kind of at the end of the line, we've seen what it's like when the White Sox try to import leadership or a different voice or culture, what have you, and guys don't perform and they end up not mattering. So you could have a lot of guys who are supposed to provide something, but because they're hitting 180 on May 15th, they are basically a non-factor, and they've added nothing in any regard, because you do have to play to a certain level to gain the respect to change things. Also, like, is there buy-in for the White Sox project overall? Buy-in for the manager? And maybe that's not necessarily so important to have people buying in on Pedro Grifol, especially if you want him out. But like, I think it does, as we saw with just the way they played at various dismal stretches over the course of the season, like, he was not a troop rallier. So like, if they get in a similar hole where everybody's kind of looking out for themselves and they know they're not going to be part of the 2025 White Sox, there is an incentive to perform individually, but is there incentive to like help other guys get better. That's kind of what I'm wondering about when it comes to this, trying to cobble together a bunch of desperate guys and hope that the desperation fuels something. If it clicks well enough, then I think you could see that change of just like, cleaner innings, less teammates pissed off with each other, teammates who understand the back of the baseball card and know that Paul DeJong's not supposed to hit, but he's making some nice plays. He got me out of that inning. That's what he's supposed to do. I could see that kind of generating some okay vibes in place of last year's just toxicity is the word I keep coming back to. But I could see it going either way. And if they start with another 10-game losing streak in April, like they did last year, I don't think there's the internal galvanizing force that will help them get out of it necessarily.
Yeah, I could see your point. And with so many players on one-year deals, we're kind of beating around the bush. My grade for Chris Getz, and push back if you think it's too high, Jim. I'm giving Chris Getz a C- for his first offseason as White Sox GM. He wanted to get better defensively. I do think he's built a better defensive team. And they wanted a new culture. They wanted to bring in veterans. They've definitely done that, especially if some of these non-roster invitees are going to make the team. But the reason why it's not higher than a C-, one, he didn't trade Dylan Cease. And two, I still don't have clarity on what the long-term plan is for the White Sox and how they're going to get back into contention. And maybe that does come later in the season when he does trade Dylan Cease. And when eventually we do see Colson Montgomery and Brian Ramos join the White Sox, if they are healthy and they are excelling down in the minor leagues, that definitely will help with the long-term picture and a path for the White Sox to get back to contending and playing winning baseball again. So that's why I'm giving Chris Getz a C-. I think he could have done more as far as providing what the long-term plan is going to be for the White Sox. But the only chess piece that he has in helping that cause greatly was trading Dylan Cease, and Dylan Cease is still in camp. So that's why I don't know. Is that too gracious of a grade, a C-?
Yeah, I think I'm going to give him a D. And were it not for the trades for Dominic, Fletcher, and Zach DeLoach, I would have given him an F. Just because, setting aside Dylan Cease, because I haven't seen anything that makes me think that he's passed up a killer deal. Everything that we've seen from reports is the Yankees don't include Spencer Jones. The White Sox have the right to ask for Spencer Jones. They might not have the right to ask for Spencer Jones and 3 other top 100 prospects, but Spencer Jones himself, that's not necessarily a non-starter. And basically the Reds one was the one where that's kind of a steep ask, but also not necessarily when it comes to high school pitching being part of what they're acquiring. So I haven't seen anything that suggests Getz is asking for way too much. And I'd rather see Getz hold out for a, decent deal like Rick Hahn did with Jose Quintana, when everybody's worried he's carrying Quintana into the regular season. Then he ends up getting Cease and Eloy Jimenez out of it, even though Quintana had kind of a down year, or at least down first half with the White Sox. So that's why I'm isolating Dylan Cease's presence from everything else, because trading Dylan Cease for an unimpressive return wouldn't really help matters either. So I'm okay with him. If the price is, if he's asking for too much or not lowering his price enough, maybe his price is fine and just teams have to deal with it. So there's that. But I think just what I keep thinking is if I were GM, and not hypothetically, if I had the tools and training to be GM. No, I'm talking about if the White Sox hired me as I am with the experience I have to be GM, my offseason might look the same. I might only be able to persuade desperate guys to take a contract. I couldn't sell anybody on opportunity. Why would anybody listen to me? I'm going to get a Paul DeJong because where's Paul DeJong going to go? I'm going to trade maybe 5 Braves players who the Braves are going to cut anyway. So it just struck me as he's making moves any replacement level GM could make. And might be for the better. There's a theme behind it. Yes. but there is no upside. There is no like, oh, if this trade breaks the right way, we have this position solved. There was none of that until Fletcher and DeLoach showed up. And then that was the first glimmer of like, oh, these guys might be useful in 2027. Should the White Sox be able to unlock what they've shown in bursts. Brian Bannister, I think, is another X factor, waiting to see like whether he's able to work the same magic that he was in San Francisco, where like some unimpressive pitching staffs did really well. So that's another reason why like I want to suspend my grade a little bit to see like, can Bannister do the same things here? And we have to reset our expectations for like, oh, the White Sox can shop down market for once. But for what we know right now, it looks like Getz was given a mandate by Reinsdorf to cut, and so he did. And the result was that he could only sign players who could only do one thing well, and he chose defense because, one, like it makes games watchable more than like what the White Sox showed last year, and also defense is cheap when the defenders can't hit. So like that's why it strikes me as replacement level GM work. And so that's why like I'm inclined to give it a D, just because, before Fletcher and DeLoach showed up, there was nobody who represented a long-term solution aside from like maybe Jared Schuster, which doesn't seem like it should be the case.
Yeah, I see your point. I do see your point. They did outbid the New York Mets though, Jim, for Erick Fedde. Like that did happen.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean like that's $15 million in 2 years. And that did show like an ability to close a deal with the Boris client. So like, yeah, that's a point in his favor.
It's not a big point to your point. It's not a big point, but it is something that
only a 2-year contract. So it's not like it doesn't fit that mold of like, will he be part of the next contention window when the prospect wave, will he supplement the prospect wave? And the answer is no. So it's like, it's good. It's interesting. I'm going to enjoy following Fedde and seeing what he does. And it will help the team, or at least a kind of opportunity the White Sox should use to maybe help them again. Should this work out and should there be more compelling KBO prospects or NPB prospects down the line? But for helping this team, it's like, yeah, it's nice, but it's like it's nice move that he made all winter before Fletcher. Those are the two moves where like, oh, okay, finally the kind of move they should be making.
I think I'm going to still stick with the C- grade, because you also pointed out adding Ryan Bannister, that should help. Adding Josh Barfield, that should help. There's a lot more. And I think Chris Getz realized that in October, that, wow, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to get this ship back in the right direction. And then in November, and I think that's probably aiding in my grade of giving him a C- and not dipping into the Ds, is just him being very honest and transparent in how he feels about his current team. Like, we know that this is going to be a transition year. He set a game plan. He met that game plan. And I think you and I could agree that, yeah, they need to be better on defense. And wow, the White Sox set their goals on something realistic and they achieved it. Whereas the last couple of off seasons, it's like, why are they spending so much money in the bullpen? Mm-hmm. Why do they keep doing this? Why do they keep ignoring right field? Why do they keep ignoring second base? See, I'm good with, I know my C- is a higher grade than I gave Rick Hahn the last two off seasons where it was not very good grades at all. Mm-hmm. But for his first time around, yeah, I'm going to stick with my C- for Chris Getz. Maybe it would have been higher if he traded Dylan Cease, but I think you're also right, Jim. You got to keep it an asterisk because maybe he's not done adding, as we have seen with the non-roster invites, and we can kind of transition to this topic.
Well, before we do, like, just one thing, you did make a good point in terms of like, at least he's not trying to sell it. So he has been tolerable, I think, in his rhetoric that he's qualifying statements and not really trying to pump everything. Pedro Grifol is, but Getz is not. It kind of reminds me, like, one line or phrase that made me laugh was he described what he's trying to add as winning style baseball. Like, not winning baseball, like winning style, which reminded me, I don't know if you ever saw like I don't know how many years ago it was, but it was Will Ferrell days of SNL where he was Robert Mondavi's son opening up his own vineyard.
Okay.
And he was introducing, and I looked up the transcript, from 1998. He said he was offering a 2-liter Mountain Dew bottle filled with Sean Mondavi's Reddish-style wine drink.
Reddish.
That's what winning style baseball reminded me of. Like, it's not red wine, it's Reddish-style wine drink. And that's kind of what I think Chris Getz has assembled so far. And at least he's not trying to sell it as a whole lot more.
What kind of wine are the 2024 White Sox? Reddish. Oh, man. Well, as I was about to transition, because Chris Getz's work hasn't been done. I mean, he's still been busy. The White Sox have signed Mike Moustakas. And Jim, you wrote about this at SoxMachine.com, and I talked about this with James, that it does appear that Moustakas, the reason he's been signed is that if there is life in the bat, he could help out with depth at third base, at first base, and help out in games against tough righties where he could DH for the White Sox. As again, they have struggled against top-tier right-handed pitchers, and Moustakas was okay in Colorado, not okay in Anaheim. And John Morosi of MLB.com tweeted out, as I spoke earlier in the podcast, that Whit Merrifield is looking to make a final decision where he plays this upcoming weekend. We keep making fun of the White Sox that they keep signing all these ex-Kansas City Royals, but by now adding Mike Moustakas, and I did tweet this out, and I do believe that if the White Sox don't sign Whit Merrifield, that would be like a minor upset. Like, I'm mentally preparing, Jim, that Whit Merrifield...
That was my big free agent signing.
And I think you're going to be right. And then on Monday's podcast, we could talk about and how Merrifield fits in with the White Sox, and maybe there's even more roster shuffling going on with a 26-man roster. But what do you make about these non-roster invitees, and also like the veteran relievers that they have brought into camp as well to try to reshape the bullpen?
Yeah, Moustakas, I saw it and I just like rolled my eyes basically of just and the White Sox released the news at 9:02 p.m. So even I think we're thinking like, let's try to minimize the amount of just replies we get. Yeah, let's save our mentions the best we can and release this news as late as possible. Like, not at 2:30 in the morning release, because that would be too obvious, maybe a little bit insulting to the player. But let's stretch the bounds of what business hours are to get this done. Oh, by the way, I was just scrolling down the transcript. The reddish flavored wine drink was tequila, 5 Alive, the little marshmallows you put in cocoa, fish, and seawater. So I do think that's kind of close to the White Sox roster in that regard. But yeah, like, it's Moustakas is, as James wrote in a post he published this evening, Thursday evening, it's natural for a team, especially in a new GM, to lean on the connections he had before to try to patch some roles, or like, I need a player this shape who does this. And Mike Moustakas happens to fit that shape, but just, when everybody is a former Royal, and Chris Getz, played with these guys, he's talking about a friend, and just like gets a little, we'll go from like a Rick Hahn and Kenny Williams brand of insular to like even more insular in that you're hiring friends who are playing, which is weird. Maybe it's like one step removed from like having friends who are coaching on the staff, which is the case with the White Sox. Not inspiring. Like, I think it can be overstated, just because in the case of Moustakas, I'm likening him to Hanser Alberto a little bit. Like, he's another guy, like former Royal. Grifol was comfortable with him, but ultimately, like, he was just kind of a placeholder for opening day, and then they'll adjust that roster spot as different needs arise. And I think that could be the same thing here. But yeah, just, it would be nice to have, if Chris Getz is like, people are making too big of a deal of these former Royals ties, then like former Royal, and just, you're kind of seeing the same thing with the pitching staff with like Brian Bannister, former Giants, Brebbia, Dominic Leone, who was just brought in like on an NRI. Like, we are seeing Bannister lean on that, except Bannister's Giants were successful, and Grifol's Royals and the Royals that Getz was a part of were absolutely not.
Well, we'll see if the White Sox do sign Whit Merrifield and what other non-roster invitees. I mean, they already have like 29 non-roster invitees in camp.
69 guys in camp, yep.
Nice amount of people at spring training camp. And as James talked about earlier in the show, more and more of the position players will be showing up over the weekend. But before we conclude this podcast, there was some news that came down the pipe for Major League Baseball on Thursday. Commissioner Rob Manfred announced that this is going to be his last term as commissioner, as his term expires in January of 2029. There is still one more CBA battle for Rob Manfred against the Players Association, as the current CBA is set to expire in December 1st of 2026, and that fight is going to be a dandy. Expectations regarding streaming rights and future television broadcasting rights, and of course, the path to expansion for Major League Baseball to increase from 30 to 32 teams. And Rob Manfred will get one more opportunity to put his stamp on the game of baseball before he leaves. And Jim, now that we understand the light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to Rob Manfred's time as commissioner, I guess what's left on the docket for him? Because a lot of rule changes, the CBA fights have been ugly. Under his watch, we got to participate in a lockout for Major League Baseball. Had to deal with COVID as well. But in these last 5 years, what do you think is the most pressing issue revolving around Major League Baseball that Rob Manfred must address as commissioner?
Broadcasting is a big one. Just because so much, or a significant portion of franchise values stemmed from the sweetheart cable deals teams got. And now that those have disappeared, or, the teams are going through them, but won't be able to renew at the absurd rates that they got before. How are they going to counteract that? How are they going to provide fans of all ages a product that they can view? Because baseball, their demographic is older, so you can't just go all streaming and make it hard for your core audience of 55 and older to, find it, so you have to balance, over the air versus streaming versus, what's on Roku and, all that sorts of, fun stuff. So there's that. Also Las Vegas, the A's. That's a pretty big one because that's a mess right now, and that has to be settled before expansion can be brought up. And it's really unclear. You're seeing renderings for a potential White Sox ballpark in the 78. You're seeing renderings for Kansas City's proposed ballpark in the Crossroads area of Kansas City, which is, still a proposal, and a whole bunch of land that's currently in use has to be determined, and prices have to be met, I think, to buy some people off land. But you're seeing renderings and a vision of what they want. You have not seen renderings yet for Las Vegas, even though a hotel's coming down, land's becoming available, and that's where they're supposed to build. And you have the mayor saying, the mayor of Las Vegas, who is not in charge of that strip of land on the Tropicana because it's unincorporated, but mayor of Las Vegas saying off the record, at least not realizing that it was how the comments would sound, saying oh, maybe he doesn't know what he's doing, and maybe this isn't a good idea. And you have the mayor of Oakland who's trying to hold his feet to the fire with regards to having opportunity to negotiate favorable terms with a lease because they don't know where to play in between going from something it's a mess. And when you see how big of a mess it is, you wonder why Manfred let the owners allow him to move to Las Vegas or explore it, and give him the official approval, because this would cast his entire judgment into doubt, unless I saw a comment on Sox Machine referencing comment, said elsewhere, saying unless they just want to reveal Fisher as too incompetent to run a franchise to where maybe they can force him to sell if he really makes a mess out of this. But I don't know if the owners are that smooth to set somebody up to fail. I don't know if they want to do that, because there are a number of bad owners in baseball. Jerry Reinsdorf being one of them, and there before the grace of God go I think, when it comes to botching something like this. So that's why I'm skeptical of that line, but I don't know why the league and Manfred would approve such a shoddy plan otherwise, unless they're okay with it failing for some reason.
But that will do it for this episode of the Sox Machine podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening. Again, we'll be back on Monday as we hear from James, as more talk coming from spring training camp down in Arizona, as the rest of the position players will show up to camp. And of course, continue to read at soxmachine.com, as James and Jim have been doing a fantastic job. You can catch up at Prospects Week. We also had a couple of great podcasts as well with Jim Callis and Keith Law to talk about the White Sox prospects. Great job with Keith, Jim. I thought that was a fantastic conversation. But on Friday, college baseball opening day, and that kicks off our 2024 MLB draft coverage, as you can go to soxmachine.com, and I have the college baseball preview and my first watch board for the 2024 Major League Baseball draft. I know it's been a lot of content, folks, and really appreciate all the comments, Jim, that we've got in the comment section about people really happy and raving so far and the quality of content that we've been putting on the site and in the podcast. And all I have to say to that is expect more, because it's going to be busy, especially in the upcoming month.
It's been awesome having James down in Arizona, providing first-person accounts and the color that he provides that no other beat writer does. So I really missed that during the times when, after the Athletic laid him off, to where we get a taste of it here and there when he was with the Sun Times. But it's great to have him back every day, providing, his insights that, he sees and hears that maybe other people don't. And that's great. When it comes to Patreon supporters, we're up 300 since he joined. So glad that people are signing up. A reminder to people who are in the $2 and $3 tiers, we are making all content available to all previous tiers throughout the month of February to just, show what we're doing. You get an idea of what it's like, give people time to, upgrade their membership to the $5 tier, over the course of the months. And we realize people are getting back into baseball at different times and might have missed out on James joining us. But if you are in the $2 and $3 tiers and you like what we're doing, I recommend upgrading to the $5 tiers, just because probably by opening day, if not before, that's when we'll start making the Patreon content $5 and up. So hopefully we're proving our worth by doing so. Early returns and the response has made me think I think this might be able to work, but it will take support to keep doing it. And hopefully we'll keep providing the proof of concept that we are providing a White Sox resource like no other.
You can subscribe to the Sox Machine podcast, especially if this is the first time you're listening to the show, wherever you listen to podcasts, such as Spotify and Apple Music. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and youtube.com/Sox Machine to watch our videos. And you can follow us on social media at Sox Machine, wherever you have a social media platform. And you can follow me there as well at SoxMachine_Josh. As Jim mentioned, you can help support us by signing up at patreon.com/Sox Machine. The Sox Machine podcast is a production of SoxMachine.com. You're up for all things Chicago White Sox baseball and part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Alongside Jim Margalus and James Fegan, I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for listening and watching.